perfection, we support sustainable fisheries in Maine and around the world. Extraordinary selection and highest quality are the hallmarks of what you will find here. Entertain your guests with a selection from our curated wine list and fresh cheeses cut to order. Whether you shop online or visit us in Portland, freshness is paramount and great care is taken to ensure your satisfaction.
Okay, so why use Toyota service centers?
Well, you wouldn't use just any carpenter, would you?
This thing working? Oh, I'm never getting out of here. No.
Right.
Toyota Service Centers. Keep your Toyota a Toyota. Toyota. Let's go places.
September 11th, 2001 was one of the most shocking and darkest days in our nation's history. And even after 2 decades, the memories live vividly in the minds of those who witnessed it. Good evening, I'm Pat Callahan.
And I'm Samantha York. Tonight we bring you back 20 years to a series of tragic events that began right here in Maine at the Portland International Jetport, where 2 of the 19 hijackers boarded a plane to Boston. For this man, Michael Toohey, remembering exactly where he was the morning of September 11th, 2001, is not a choice. It's seared into him. He's held on to a lot of memories over the years, but the ones too painful to look at remain here, in this box. That day, the world watched as terrorism hit American soil. 19 militants, who we now know all belong to the Islamic terrorist group Al-Qaeda, hijacked 4 separate commercial flights, all headed for California. 2 planes would hit the World Trade Center in New York City. 1 would hit the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and another would land in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Thousands were killed in the attacks.
Look at that picture. It still affects me after all this time.
That morning, Toohey had gone to work as usual at the Portland International Jetport.
It was a perfect morning. The sun hadn't come up yet because it was still very early.
Toohey was the opening agent for U.S. Airways. That September morning, he remembers the jetport being more quiet than usual. Little did he know, that was about to change.
I see 2 fellas looking around like they don't know where they're going. And I said, what airline are you guys on? And he says, U.S. Air. I said, where are you going? He said, Boston. Oh, it's after 5:30. The flight's leaving at 6. And I'm saying, oh, you guys got to come over here. So I went back to the counter.
Toohey began to check in the men for their flight. The 2 would be flying first class to Los Angeles by way of Boston. All seemed well, until Ada noticed they would have to check in for their connecting flight once arriving at Logan International Airport.
And he just tensely looking at me. He says, they told me 1-step check-in. And I'm going, oh boy, I don't want to get into confrontation with this guy. He's a miserable looking person. And so I said, well, let me try this. I said, Mr. Atta, your flight is leaving very shortly. If you don't get upstairs real quick, you're going to miss your flight altogether. Check in with American Airlines in Boston. And I think that part about you're going to miss your flight altogether convinced him to turn right around and get upstairs.
Then he says the morning continued as usual until Toohey bumped into another airline agent a couple hours later.
As she's walking by, he says, did you see what happened down in New York? I says, no, I didn't. She said, an airplane crashed into the World Trade Center. It doesn't. And I says, what, you know, how many, a lot of people get killed? She says, it was a commercial plane. And I was just struck.
The first flight, Flight 11, hit the North Tower just before 9 a.m. The second, Flight 175, struck the South Tower not even 20 minutes later. As more and more information got released, Toohey came to a gut-wrenching conclusion.
It didn't register right away. But a girl I was working with, Diane, she says, "Hey, Toohey, didn't you check 2 guys in on that flight?" And I stopped. And I thought about it. My initial reaction is, geez, I feel so bad for these guys. And then it hit me.
It hit him. It was Ada and Alamari. Maybe they hijacked Flight 11. Toohey's boss gave him the next few days off. He says most of that time was spent being interviewed by the FBI. Finding comfort seemed impossible, so he did what any of us would do. He called his mom.
She says to me, "Why are you crying?" And I told her what happened. And she said, "What's that got to do with you?" Now she's 90 years old. And she says, "I'll be right up."
Did that bring you comfort, having her here?
Oh, to have your mother wrap around a little tiny woman, wrap her arms around you and say, "Everything's okay. It's not your fault." It didn't take all the guilt away, but it's your mother. She says it's okay. It must be okay.
But the magnitude of thousands of Americans dying such brutal deaths in the World Trade Center attacks would haunt him. It would take years and 4 different psychologists to help Toohey work through the deepening pain.
I carried around a lot of guilt. What did I miss? How come I didn't stop them? You know, all of that. And I found out that talking about it was very, very good. You know, it let it out there.
20 years later, Toohey finds comfort here, at his home in Maine, with his wife Maureen and their dog Bailey. But he would be the first to tell you, the pain from that day never really goes away. You just learn over time to manage it.
I don't dwell on it. I can't dwell on it. If you dwell on it, you go crazy. I get a lot of counseling. I had a good ma. I had good friends. I've had an exciting, a pretty, I would say, exciting life in the last 20 years. I just hope nobody would ever have to go through what we went through again.
All commercial flights were grounded after the attacks, and pilots from Maine's 101st Air National Guard took to the skies.
They had just wrapped up a weekend of training, and little did Colonel Ian Gillis know he was about to put those lessons to the test.
We had a couple of airplanes already airborne for training missions that day that were pressed into service right over New York. We generated 3 more aircraft, got them ready for immediate takeoff with full fuel loads, and I was on the 3rd jet that we generated that day. We took off, contacted the local ground control intercept radar, the military radar controller, and they directed us towards Boston. And we set up an orbit between Boston and Providence, and we proceeded to refuel the fighter team that was working the Boston airport. And when you're refueling armed fighters over the United States, that's something we've never had to do before. And it was a little bit sobering with the realization that we were flying armed patrols over our own country.
From a bunker in Augusta to the Capitol in Washington, D.C. When we come back, we'll hear from some of Maine's elected officials about how they responded after the second plane hit the Twin Towers.
At BIW, we go to work each day to make the best ships in the world. The work we do keeps our country safe, and the shipbuilders here take great pride in their effort. We think of all our shipbuilders as heroes, but we want to take this special opportunity to thank the veterans who work with us. Their sacrifice is appreciated and reminds us every day of the heroes that serve on the ships we build. Bath Iron Works is proud to sponsor Military Appreciation on News Center Maine.
My dad served as a Marine in World War II, and after finishing school using the GI Bill, he helped start and eventually became the owner of this business. They always appreciated what he and so many others have done for our country. I think that same appreciation certainly influenced my son Mark to enlist in the Marines in 2003. He managed to get through the war, he did his part, and I'm just proud of him, and I'm proud of all the men and women that have served our nation.
As soon as the terrorists flew the second plane into the South Tower of the World Trade Center, the focus for the state's elected leaders quickly turned to keeping Mainers safe.
That was a challenge because no one yet knew the extent of the plot and whether there would be more attacks.
The morning the Twin Towers fell, Senator Angus King was in Maine. He was Governor Angus King back then.
My chief of staff knocked on the door and stuck her head in and said, "A second plane has hit the World Trade Center. This looks like an attack."
She was right.
The first thing we did was evacuate the State House and went up to Camp Keys in Augusta, where there was an underground sort of command center.
Soon after, the phone rang again.
I got a frantic call from my former wife telling me that our son, who we knew worked in Lower Manhattan in the financial district, was missing.
Back in Washington, Senator Susan Collins, who was serving in her first term, was also processing the news.
I walked home and I remember so well that there were armed soldiers with powerful rifles, machine guns in front of the Supreme Court.
As she watched the aftermath unfold on television, she tried phoning her staff and others. All the circuits were busy, so she says she walked back to the Capitol and headed straight for police headquarters.
I wanted Americans across the country to see that government still existed, that we weren't in the midst of a coup, that we weren't overthrown, and that we were resilient and strong, and we would make those who killed more than 3,000 Americans pay a price.
Those feelings were mirrored by King back in Maine, who would finally make contact with his son, but still faced uncharted territory in his role as governor.
My job was to restore people's confidence. People were shaken. They wanted to know that somebody was looking out for them. It was a complicated day.
A complicated day that would end in unity. No Republicans, no Democrats, no partisan politics. Just Americans trying to rise above.
Several of us felt that we should go over to the Capitol steps. Someone started singing "God Bless America."
Okay.
And I have to tell you, it was one of the most moving moments of my life.
Stand beside her, stand guide her.
This attack was so horrific, and it also brought out the best in people. People rescuing one another, giving their lives for others. And all across America, a feeling of unity and patriotism.
God bless America, my home, sweet home.
September 11th ushered in a brand new age of security in America. Next, we'll hear from a Mainer who was there as the nation was attacked and as new safety protocols were created. And we'll hear why he says we shouldn't let our guard down.
I'm Norman Soroyce, Elders Lumber in Portland, Maine, a Maine Army National Guard veteran. Elders Lumber is proud to support military appreciation in support of Honor Flight Maine. We proudly employ military veterans in all departments of all our stores, here on Presumpscot Street or York, Kittery, and now Portsmouth. And when you see an Elders Lumber delivery driver on your job site, they are likely a military veteran who proudly served their country. Please stop by any Elders Lumber location this year to donate some change and help us support Honor Flight Maine.
My dad served as a Marine in World War II, and after finishing school using the GI Bill, he helped start and eventually became the owner of this business. They always appreciated what he and so many others have done for our country. I think that same appreciation certainly influenced my son Mark to enlist in the Marines in 2003. He managed to get through the war, he did his part, and I'm just proud of him, and I'm proud of all the men and women that have served our nation.
Some Mainers were very close to the action that unfolded on September 11th.
Chet Lunner of Cape Elizabeth is a retired intelligence officer for the Department of Homeland Security. On 9/11, this former newspaper man was in Washington working for the U.S. Secretary of Transportation.
The morning of 9/11, it was a beautiful day like this, and no hint of anything awry. The Secretary of Transportation, Norman Mineta, at the time, was my boss, and I was waiting outside his conference room as he met with the transportation minister from Belgium, I think it was. The first plane hit, and we got worried, and the FAA chief was in there with them in this meeting, so we were debating about whether to open it up or not. The second plane hit, and we broke up the meeting and started to go into defensive mode. At the time, you will recall, there was no such thing as TSA. There was no such thing as Homeland Security. It was a total shock and surprise. You may recall that the president, who would normally be at the center of these things in a public way, was whisked away to a secure, undisclosed facility and flying around on Air Force One, unavailable. So what we had to do, those of us who were still back in D.C., was rush around and get the information out that we could. That was my primary job at the time. And I remember later that day writing some remarks for the secretary in the back seat of his limo as we raced across D.C., being guarded by people I'd never seen with weapons. And it was just all very surreal.
One of the most cherished freedoms is the freedom of movement, the ability to move freely and safely. But today that freedom was attacked.
I was preparing the secretary for the White House briefing. Back at my office, the telephone lines were melting down because the transportation system had been used as a weapon against our country. Consequently, everybody, you've heard the phrase, the whole world is watching. The whole world was watching on that day, and it was very intense and uncomfortable. But that was our job, so we pushed ahead.
I have ordered the FAA to ground all commercial air traffic until at least tomorrow afternoon.
You may recall that one of the steps we took was to ground all the airplanes in the United States, not since the Wright brothers had the air lanes been so empty. And then gradually reopened it as we became more and more confident that the attacks were over. But at the time, we had to really be innovative and just respond as quickly as possible in a totally unknown area where nobody had any experience because the Homeland had never been attacked like that before.
Travelers will indeed see increased security measures at our airports, train stations, and other key sites.
And you always like to talk about situational awareness. What does that mean?
That means the classic line that we used at the Homeland Security Department, if you see something, say something. It's very easy to slide back into our relaxed state. You know, as Americans, I'm afraid we like all our problems to come and go within 30 minutes minus the commercials, you know, and oh good, that's all done. I don't have to think about it anymore. It's not time to relax. It's not time to be alarmed, but it's not time to completely forget that this is happening.
When we return, we'll hear from the Maine congressman who joined the Marines after 9/11 and went to serve in the War on Terror. And the physical and mental toll for those on the front lines of the attacks cannot be understated. But as any Mainer knows, our state's natural beauty can be therapeutic. And for one man, it was life-changing.
At BIW, we go to work each day to make the best ships in the world. The work we do keeps our country safe, and the shipbuilders here take great pride in their effort. We think of all our shipbuilders as heroes, but we want to take this special opportunity to thank the veterans who work with us. Their sacrifice is appreciated and reminds us every day of the heroes that serve on the ships we build. South Ironworks is proud to sponsor Military Appreciation on News Center Maine.
I'm Norman Soroyce, Elders Lumber in Portland, Maine, a Maine Army National Guard veteran. Elders Lumber is proud to support military appreciation in support of Honor Flight Maine. We proudly employ military veterans in all departments of all our stores, here on Presumpscot Street or York, Kittery, and now Portsmouth. And when you see an Elders Lumber delivery driver on your job site, they are likely a military veteran who proudly served their country. Please stop by any Elders Lumber location this year to donate some change and help us support Honor Flight Maine.
The September 11th attacks led to what would become our country's longest war. It also led a new generation of Americans to volunteer to fight the war on terror.
One of them is now serving in Congress from Maine's 2nd District. Here's News Center Maine's Don Carrigan.
On the morning the world changed, Jared Golden was 19 years old in his first month of college.
I was a freshman at the University of Maine, Farmington.
He says their instructor in a government class told students to find a TV. And that's how Golden and his classmates learned the terrorists had attacked.
One of my colleagues in the Armed Services Committee said it well. For a lot of young Americans, thank God, they don't necessarily know what that feeling of fear and hurt and anger is. That so many of us associate with 9/11.
For Golden, that fear, hurt, and anger led him to put his life on hold. He joined the Marines and headed to Afghanistan on a combat mission.
And it was pure counterterrorism. So that was a deployment that was fully associated with 9/11 and the effort to bring to justice the perpetrators of 9/11, Osama bin Laden and his captains and lieutenants and foot soldiers.
Tens of thousands of young Americans did the same thing, joining the war on terror firsthand, facing a world Jared Golden says would never be the same.
How much did 9/11 change this country, do you think?
Significantly. One of the most impactful catastrophes, events in my lifetime. It changed the trajectory of our future. The counter-terrorism mission, or the terrorist threat, the international terrorist threat, has not gone away. And that's something that I think that we will be dealing with for the rest of our lives, unfortunately.
It's sad to think about.
It is, but it's necessary.
The war Golden and so many others fought in has lasted nearly 20 years, costing thousands of American lives and many more permanently scarred. Now, as a member of Congress, Golden serves on the committee that helps oversee the military. That includes those in uniform who helped evacuate more than 100,000 from Afghanistan. Golden says our pullout from that country had to happen, but was done badly. That, he says, is a failure of leadership, not of the soldiers and fellow Marines on the ground.
Every one of them should hold their heads up high, be proud of who they are, and what they were willing to do for the country. They answered the call.
And as for this 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, Golden says our focus should be on remembering all those who have paid the price.
Those are the things that I spend 9/11 thinking about, and it's why it's such a sacred day and one that we need to preserve and never forget about.
Those words, never forget, can mean holding on to some painful memories.
Sometimes from tragedy, beauty is born, and we would be remiss if we did not tell you about some of that, too.
So we'll leave you tonight with the story of one man from New York who created a place to find solace right here in Maine.
It was horrific for those that have never experienced warfare.
John's Ferrarzo was close to ground zero on the morning the nation and his life would change forever.
It was nothing but a total nightmare.
The union iron worker and his crew had stopped for coffee on the way to a job site when two passenger jets plowed into the World Trade Center. Without hesitation, they ran towards the smoke.
The National Guard and members of the reserves, along with some police department, told us we had to turn around and go back. That wasn't gonna happen.
What he saw next still haunts him.
The crushed fire trucks and crushed police cars. We were picking them up. It was very difficult to stay. I will tell you this. I never saw what anybody's intestines looked like or brain matter. I had never picked up body parts, but I kept thinking in my mind, how the hell could I leave? Where am I gonna go? What am I gonna do? This is something that I have to do.
John spent days digging through the rubble at Ground Zero. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. An act of heroism that came with a price.
I'm living proof of somebody who went through this. But I'm also living proof of an individual who suffered from PTSD. The thoughts, the smells, the sounds, goes nowhere but up here. It's locked in.
But about 430 miles north, tucked away in the woods of Franklin County, Maine, John found his saving grace. This is the Memorial Forest, also known as Owens Marsh Restoration Project. 791 acres of 100% pure Maine. Over the last 20 years, John's focus has been turning this property into a safe haven, an escape, if you will, a place where our nation's service members and first responders can get lost for a while.
It's been therapy for me.
Therapy for him and those helping him turn this dream into reality.
I have a flag that flies every day, but
The land's caretaker, Herb Hingley, and Maine forester, Bob Carlton, know this terrain like their own names.
It's kind of like roads, you know? Yep. 25 feet apart or something.
The land is organized into 3 different lots, each one filled with newly planted trees, flowers, and other vegetation for the wide variety of critters that live here. A mecca for wildlife and retired service members, like Denise Cross.
People have a tendency to be happy, you know, when you're all by yourself and all you've got is nature around you.
Bob would tell you the same.
when you're out here, you just don't think about it. It's just peaceful and calm, not a care in the world.
As an active member of the Kingfield Fire Department, Carlton has seen the devastating effects of tragedy firsthand. With the anniversary of 9/11, he can't help but remember.
If you look at my fire helmet in my truck, there's a decal on the back, 9/11, never forget. It's a day we remember, but we remember with heavy hearts.
Over time, John's Ferrarzo hopes to see even more people make the trip north to get lost in the woods of Maine. He says it's the least he could do for those who have given so much.
A living tribute dedicated to all who came and served when Lady Liberty called.
Dunkin', it's a game day ritual, like giving yourself a pregame pep talk.
Let's go, Devin. This is your moment. Let's dominate.
Yeah, Kyle. All that stuff Devin said.
Yeah.
It's always game on with Dunkin'. Rewards members enjoy a hot or iced medium coffee for $2 on Tuesdays.
There is just generally a stigma of, wow, you're going to be vulnerable. Men aren't supposed to be vulnerable. They're supposed to be strong. They're supposed to be tough. They're supposed to be providers. How can you take care of someone or provide for someone or be strong if you appear to be mentally weak? But I also think it takes a lot of courage to own your mental health and want to do something about it. To me, it's a sign of strength if you say, I know I struggle with this and I own it and I'd like to do something about it so that I can live a better life and give a better life to the people around me.
During Bernie and Phil's Labor Day event with savings up to $800 on select Stearns & Foster adjustable sleep systems, now's the time to get your best night's sleep ever. Exceptionally handcrafted and precisely engineered Queen...